Hi everybody, welcome to Unit 4, Sensation and Perception. This is one of my absolute favorite units because there are so many great, fun, interesting activities to do as we study how our senses take in information and how our brains then interpret and perceive them. We're going to start off with some basic principles of sensing the world. And then we sort of get into the senses themselves, some of the parts of, the eye and the ear and things like that. The other senses, the chemical senses, such as taste and smell, of course, your sense of pain and touch and all of those good things. Those all come under sensation. And then we move into perceiving in all of those different arenas. But we're going to start with some basic principles of sensation. Okay, so the first thing you need to understand is that sensation and perception are one continuous process. So sensation is the idea that the process by which our sensory receptors and nervous system receive and represent stimulus energies from our environment. So essentially, our sensory receptors take in energy from the universe, and that is how we are able to take in information about our environment. We then take that information and we interpret and perceive it. But before we get to that, perception is this idea of organizing and interpreting all that sensory information. And this enables us to recognize and make meaning out of objects and events. So it could be something from, I smell my mother's favorite chocolate chip cookies baking in the oven when you get home from school, to, oh, remember that song from the summer before freshman year? That was so cool. All of that is encompassed in perception. So yes, they are one continuous process. So there are two ways that we sort of process information: bottom-up processing and top-down processing. Most of our processing of one of these natures is top-down. But before we get to that, bottom-up processing is simply you take in the sensory information and the brain sort of integrates that information into the necessary areas of the different components of the brain. So you taste milk, your senses say, oh, this is cold liquid. That's bottom-up processing. Top-down processing is sort of using our higher level mental processes, our critical thinking skills, to construct perceptions of those experiences. If you go back to the milk example, your bottom-up processing says this is cold and wet and creamy, and so you say this is milk. But your top-down processing is when you actually identify it as milk. So the two sort of work together. Top-down processing occurs particularly as you grow out of like toddlerhood and into early childhood and then through elementary school and such. The more experiences you have, the more top-down processing you can use. Another really key sensory principle or concept is what we call selective attention. Selective attention is focusing our conscious awareness on a particular stimulus. And it usually has to do with something that we are very familiar with. So with that being said, this concept is also called the cocktail party effect. So you know when you go into a party and there's lots of people around and you sort of hear like a buzz of conversation, and then all of a sudden you're walking across the room and you sort of hear your name from one of the sides of the room. You perk up, you know your name. You selectively pay attention to it. So it got its nickname, the cocktail party effect, because it's like being at a party and you hear your name. Right now, my daughter is coming up and all I hear is her screaming, even though I've got kind of a buzz of activity around. This is cocktail party effect. So I'm going to have a couple of different videos on selective attention for you later on this week, something that we're going to take on at Hanover High School. So yes, so the selective attention, also known as the cocktail party effect. We'll do a little bit more on this later on this week. Change blindness is another one of these concepts. Again, I'll have a couple of videos on this for you later on in the week when we do a little bit more detailed work. But change blindness is failing to notice changes in the environment. And there was a famous experiment done in which you can see kind of the steps here. This man in the brown jacket asked this older gentleman here for directions. And you can see, you know, he's dark hair, dark jacket, brown hair and all of that. He's holding a piece of paper, looks like a map or something, and he asked the man for the directions. Then in the middle of them just talking about the directions, these people come through with this, what looks to be a painting or board, and they walk right in between the man in the brown jacket and the older gentleman. Hold on, there's my phone. It's very busy in the Coates household this afternoon. So the board comes between the two men. Behind the board, these two men change places. And who's left, is this other man in the greenish jacket, a little bit lighter skin, dark hair, and this man, the older gentleman, doesn't know the difference. Now, they're not picking on him because he's older. This happens with just as many younger folks as well. So change blindness is sort of your inability to notice change in your environment. And again, we'll look more at this in more in-depth later on this week, but just to sort of start you thinking about it. Our last concept today is under the idea of thresholds, and we're going to do a couple of activities that have to do with thresholds. Great fun stuff. But what you need to understand is this field called psychophysics. Psychophysics is the study of relationships between physical characteristics of stimuli, such as their intensity, and our psychological experience of them. So some of you who I have in humanities, we saw that TED Talk by Malcolm Gladwell, where he talks about Howard Moskowitz, who was this researcher. And Howard, for those of you who weren't with me to watch it, you will at some point if I have you in humanities. But Howard is this researcher. And he lands on different accounts, primarily spaghetti sauce and Diet Pepsi and coffee. And they ask him to create the most perfect Diet Pepsi, the most perfect spaghetti sauce, and the most perfect coffee. And his research indicates to him that there is no perfect any of those. There's only the idea of giving people different varieties. There's only perfect Pepsis, he says. So he is a psychophysicist. He is studying the relationship between the physical characteristics of the stimuli. So for example, how sweet the Diet Pepsi is, and our psychological experience of that Diet Pepsi is trying to figure out, do we like it, do we not like it? So psychophysics is used a lot in the food industry, as you can imagine, food and drink industry, but it's also used in another of different arenas like the entertainment industry and things like that. So psychophysics is very much important when we're looking to kind of look at the relationship between how we perceive stimuli and the physical characteristics of the stimuli. All right, so that's it for tonight. What I'd like you to do is to kind of go through this again, take some notes, and I will see you in class tomorrow, and we'll start in on some other concepts having to do with sensation and perception. I'd like to get through vision and hearing in the next couple of days. And, you know, we'll go from there so we can get to some of the good activities. I will see you tomorrow or Monday, whenever you're doing this. Have a great rest of your weekend. I hope you have fun at homecoming. Be safe, and I will see you soon. Bye.